I see people coming in already. So good morning, everybody. We will we'll wait a few seconds here to let people come on in. We want to thank you for joining us on our new day, Fridays. So for Jean, Susan, and Ruth, normally we would host our Coffee at 10s on Tuesdays, and we are transitioning to a Friday, and I'm thinking it feels pretty good.
Yeah, it kind of threw me. My week just felt different.
Yeah, I think it's going to be good. So I see some familiar faces. It's good to see everybody coming in. It's how is it down in the Ann Arbor area? Because it's definitely feeling fall today.
Yes, definitely.
Fallish and sunny currently.
Yeah.
Oh, we have had rain. So hi, Sherry. I see Sherry said hi. I'll just pop in the little chat. I encourage everybody, if they want, to say hello and where they're watching from.
All right, I think Facebook might be cooperating so far, so good.
Fantastic. So as everybody is logging in, one of the new things that we're going to start doing, because we're recording these conversations, we're going to have a link in the galleries next to the exhibit when it's tied to an exhibit. So if you recommend somebody to come to see the show, they can come and visit the show in person, the exhibit in person, and then they can click on the little QR code with their smartphone. You just have to hold up your camera to it, and it'll automatically populate the link to the website. So then you can go home and watch the conversation later. So I know we have, color catchers. For the minute, I was going to say collective impulse, but no. We've got color catchers in Traverse City, and that's been a real popular with everybody that they can go home and watch it because they're fascinated by the show. Didn't realize we had a coffee at 10, so that's one of the bonuses. So good, look at, I see a lot of people checking in and telling us where they're coming from. So Harbor Springs, Okemos, I know Sherry's in Traverse City, so this is good. Well, Liz, what do you think? We'll get started and let people continue.
We are live on Zoom, we are live on Facebook, so welcome everybody. Kristi, you want to go?
Yeah, good morning. So my name is Kristi Wodek, and I'm the Education and Outreach Director from Traverse City. And I'm joined by my colleague, Liz Erlewine, and she's our Visual Arts Director from Petoskey. So before we get going, we want to thank our sponsors. We have Higher Grounds Trading Coffee in Traverse City, and we have Roast and Toast in Petoskey. So at the conclusion of this event, I will draw names from the list of attendees. I've already been adding you in here, and I will contact you, which is your preference, if you would like a $10 gift card from Petoskey or Traverse City. As a reminder, everybody is muted because this is a webinar. So we want to encourage you to leave questions or comments in the chat. And if you want to use the Q&A feature at the bottom, you can do that as well. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Liz.
Sounds great. Okay, welcome everybody. So glad to see you here on our new day. I see some of our attendees are still rolling in, but it is never hard for us to fill our hour with conversation. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So I get to broadcast from our galleries today. I am at Crooked Tree Art Center Petoskey in our Gilbert gallery, and I am very fortunate to be surrounded by the beautiful work of 3 Michigan artists who are joining us today. So today's conversation will be a chance to talk about the work and the exhibit of artists Susan Moran, Ruth Bardenstein, and Beuscher Bartlett. And so all 3 of those artists are here with us today. Just by way of introduction, I will say a little bit about how this exhibit came to Crooked Tree and the slightly bumpy road that we had to take due to this year's unexpected circumstances. So I had the pleasure of joining staff of Crooked Tree Art Center about 2.5 years ago. And when I did, we had an exhibit already in the works from our former galleries director, Sheila Ruin. And it was a great way to get started with Crooked Tree. There were some beautiful things that she had done here for Cricketry. We highlighted the work of Sherry Smith, fibers artist and amazing professor at University of Michigan. I actually went to school at University of Michigan, and though I didn't take her class, I knew of her well because of the phenomenal impact that she had on that program. And then at that same time, Sheila had organized an exhibition of some of Sherry's former students. And within that show, I had the privilege to see the work of artist Susan Moran. And Sue got to know us a little bit and got to know our space a little bit. And we were very fortunate that she decided to put together a proposal for us to consider, which ended up being the show, The Collective Impulse. We had scheduled this exhibit, our team loved it, added it to the schedule. We had anticipated hosting this show in the spring of 2020 in our Traverse City galleries. However, due to COVID-19, we did have to kind of shut down and change the game plan there. And we weren't really sure how and when we would get back to this opportunity, but fortunately, all three artists were very flexible with us. And as Kristi and I developed our visual arts programming for our fall, we realized that we really wanted to focus on the ideas of working together, coming together, community, and how important all of that is. I suppose while we were shut indoors with limited access to others, we realized just how important that is. And as visual artists, we often are thought of as working completely on our own. And a lot of the work is solitary, right? Not everybody, but a lot of people choose to work alone. But I'm very fascinated by the idea that it's never really alone, right? We're responding to what came before us. We're influencing what's going to come next. We're responding to the world around us. And some of us are really needing that interaction with other artists. So as I was thinking about all of these things during shutdown, I thought, well, gee, maybe these artists would be kind enough to come together and showcase with us this fall as we look at artists who work together. So as Kristi mentioned earlier, our Color Catchers exhibition in Traverse City is another group of artists who keep their own independent practice, but come together to share their work and, you know, exhibit together and things like that. So I hope that if you are able to join us here in the galleries and see that, you can think a little bit about that. And that's part of our conversation here today. So just with that framework, what I would like to do is say a quick hello to our panelists. And so what I'm going to do is just say your name, and since we're currently on a speaker view, if you could just say hello and wave so people know who we've got, and then we'll dig into the conversation a little bit. So Susan Moran, can you go ahead and say hello for us?
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Okay, and Ruth Bardenstein?
Hi. Hi, everyone.
Okay, there we got you. Okay, and then Jean Beuscher Bartlett.
Good morning.
It didn't catch over to you. Yeah, you got to say it again. Oh, I'll stop talking.
Good morning.
There we go. Okay, so we do have some images to share with you guys today, and we'll fit that into the conversation as appropriate. But I think first, what I would like to do, I'm going to ask you, Sue, since this proposal came through you, but anybody can respond. Can you tell us a little bit about the show and why you came up with this idea and you know, proposed it here to Cricketry?
Well, we had been kind of working together and meeting collectively, going to shows, just talking about our work for a few years. We had originally worked together at the Parsons Center in Lake Ann. I don't remember what year that was, but it was a fibers and book arts show, and it was the greatest experience for the students and for us, just to be working together, kind of sharing textile techniques and book arts techniques. And so Jean and Ruth and I kept meeting after that. And I like to have a goal when I'm working on something. I often work in a series, and I just got to the point where I thought, I need to get some work out there, and I wonder if they'd want to do it too. And I was kind of, I don't know, a little apprehensive that they would want to show their work with me, but I decided to be bold and propose it, and everybody was enthusiastic. And so then we started kind of brainstorming as far as possible venues for exhibit. And we wrote a proposal. So this all took a while. And then the show that I was in with the Sherry Smith Alumni Show came about, and I just loved the gallery up there. It was just so beautiful and professional, and I thought this would be really a nice site. So that's kind of how it came about, really.
Okay.
I don't know if you guys want to add anything.
Yeah, well, I'm just going to pop in with a question. You can add to that. But so I think I sort of got, you know, ideas of how you came together as a group based on my communication with this other group of artists that we've been working with as well. So have you three exhibited your work together in the past?
No, this is the first time. Yeah. But we have been, we've gotten together a few times, mostly at Jean's house in her studio to do some group work together. It's been really fun, and we've shared materials a bit. So I think you'll see, well, in the piece that's, you know, the introductory piece of Jean's has some fabric that I made, and in one of my mixed media drawing collages, there's a couple of ink drawings that I collaged in that Ruth made. And that all came about one day when we met at Jean's, and were we making boxes that day? I forget, but we were exchanging materials for future work.
We've also enjoyed getting together and doing kind of an experimental, more kind of process or technique. So for instance, we were over at Sue's this summer doing some indigo dyeing. And then I think last year did some walnut dyeing and calendula dyeing of paper and fabrics. So, you know, it's also nice to kind of maybe step back from the finished work and share ideas in a more sort of, I was going to say casual, but it's really more process oriented. And I think then you get to see the behind, like really the nuts and bolts. So I'm thinking of, you know, Sue's silkscreen work and her substrates. You know, she obviously really carefully considers what the colors, the textures, the kind of muted striations are going to be in those backgrounds. Ruth has shared with us recently, she has that really lovely intricate block piece that's in this carefully constructed container. So you really get a chance to see, like I said, you know, not just the finished polished work, but kind of the struggles, the you know, let's try this and it didn't quite work, you know, what have you tried? Those kinds of things have also been really great to share with fellow artists.
I was gonna just add a little bit to that, just piggybacking right on what Jean said, that another thing we did together that's also sort of process oriented, presentation oriented. We got together because Jean had done some work with making certain presentation boxes or incorporating boxes, using boxes to do different things with work. And Sue was actually interested in using some different materials. So we got together, this was either probably 2 years ago now. And we got together and made these different boxes and looked at them. And while we were doing it, work just started evolving. Like that Sue had brought materials, and all of a sudden it was like, okay, this should happen and it would work well like this. And these things went together. And then it was just it was interesting because it was each of our individual work, but it was total collaboration in terms of during the process, getting feedback, looking at other things, having a sounding board for ideas. And it really evolved in real time. And I know I went back, I think each of us after that day went back and ended up finishing stuff and doing other things, and things just rippled out from there. So you're right, Liz, that there is this interesting balance between individual work and collaboration, where we're still doing our individual pieces, but there's a lot of collaborative effects that go into them by the virtue of working together. And as Jean said, the process stuff, rather than, we've also done like critiquing each other's work. I mean, that's also happened. That's a little more typical, but the process work, I think, has been very rich. So, and that shows, I think, in the work in the exhibit as well.
Well, I think so too, and I'm excited to share some examples here. And if it's not too clumsy, I will take my camera and kind of walk around so people can see it. I think one of the things that really strikes me seeing the exhibit come to fruition. So those of you who maybe haven't really been on the back end of putting an exhibit together, it's a long process and it's a selective process, and there's images shared back and forth, but I still didn't really know how it's all going to feel and how it's going to come together until it does. And so it's a creative act in and of itself to create an exhibit. And I guess I'm really moved by how you can really feel the unique voices of each of you. But when you walk into the space, there's a unity. And I think that back and forth through those conversations and that even hands-on collaboration that you're describing is really felt. Sue, I think you had something you wanted to say, but hopefully this will kind of segue. I want to talk a little bit about that title. Many of you have already mentioned process, which to me is very evident in everything that I'm looking at here in the galleries. And even if I just look at your medium descriptions, right? There are a lot of materials. There's a lot of different process that's involved in creating many of the pieces in the gallery here. And I'm thinking about your title, The Collective Impulse, and the statement that you shared with us. So I guess I want to know, like, where did that title come from? And in the statement, and I'm not going to read it here, but maybe I can send the link in the chat or something, Kristi. There's some text on the web about it, about the idea of collecting, right? And that collective sort of act, and then the collective of the three of you coming together. You guys want to talk about that for a second?
Jean, I remember that you came up with the title. That's what I remember. We had been brainstorming a number of things that words and ideas that had to do with sort of working as a collective, collecting items, how we process. But and then I remember when Jean came up with that title, we were all like, yeah, that's it. So I don't know, Jean, if you want to add to.
Yeah, I would have to. I think it's true that I'm a word person, and I was just, things were bouncing around in my head, and when I came up with that, it just sort of coalesced a lot of things. Yes, it's true that I think actually when we were up installing the show, Sue mentioned that a theme, something really important for all of us that seemed evident to her was observation. So there's an observational element. As Liz was saying, we're all very material based. So we're very deliberate in terms of collecting materials. So that collecting is definitely a part of the process. As long as I've known Sue and Ruth, I mean, Sue and I have gone thrift store shopping and she's looking for vintage textiles. Ruth and I use an awful lot of paper, so we're always exchanging, well, this really interesting paper, where did you find that paper? And then it also seemed important to get across the collectivity of our effort in terms of the three of us.
Yeah, I also remember, Ruth came over to my house at some point. I wanted to show her something. I guess Jean was away maybe.
Yeah.
And I remember the comment that you made that I see that there is this process that you always go through where you have this collection that you've amassed and then you arrange it and you sort it and you observe it and make structures. And I think that there's a kind of a thread of that throughout all our work. but it's been very interesting to say when we get together to actually make things. Jean and Ruth have this astounding, meticulous approach that's really so inspiring to me, because I do, go through a process, but I think it's a little bit more, I don't know if haphazard is the word, but I tend to use the silkscreen like a sketchbook. So I'll make a whole lot of drawings of images, put them all on the screens, and then just start printing them on all different fabrics. And then I know that later I'll have this mass of stuff to work with, and I can cut and put it together and collage it. But it is sometimes pretty hit or miss, and it's, it can veer into the undisciplined arena. And so it's been learning. I didn't know anything about book arts until we did that workshop together. And so doing some of that, it's kind of like sewing. It's just, there's the technical side of it, which is so demanding, but very calming at the same time. It's like this world that you enter into that's just really wonderful. And I love it there, but it's not easy for me.
Okay, so I think attendees, some of you guys have probably had a chance to see the show, but many of you have not. And so let's get a sense of what it is that each of you do. So I know, Ruth, you had some images you were sharing with us. So I'm thinking, let's start with you, and then I will get my setup a little mobile so I can move through the space. So I guess just to start us off, Ruth, you want to tell us a little bit about your background as an artist, how you got started, and you can share recent images of your work, and while you do that, I'll get up and start walking around so I can show some of the gallery. How's that?
Right. I'll try to do this with the share screen, but I'll talk a little bit and we'll see if it works. Okay, so actually I started with book arts quite a long time ago in the 90s, and Jean Beuscher was one of my first teachers, and I actually ended up interning with Jean as well. And so I entered into this through book arts and bookmaking. So let me pick one just to share. So, a lot of books, this is a dose book. This is not in the show, but this is earlier work where it combines drawing, and I work a lot with word and image. So almost all my work is dealing with word and image, and very conceptual based or based on text. So this is a book based on two Emily Dickinson poems. Anyway, and so my work here, I'll stop that. So my work, I really was into book arts and book artistry, and then ended up going back to get my MFA, and ended up doing more 2D and typography. Let me show some of that. In terms of word and image, it sort of naturally flowed into typography, but I'm not seeing my share screen here. Let me just see. Sorry about that.
It's okay. It might be at the top.
Yeah, no, it's just not right now. It's not right now. So anyway, I did a lot of more graphic stuff, graphic design, graphic arts, more typography, working with alphabets, developing alphabets. I had a nice picture I wanted to show. And then ended up getting into assemblage. So I'm gonna show, let me see if I can do the screen share here. For some reason, I cannot screen share anymore. Yeah, I'm not sure why.
Ruth, you shared some with me, but why don't I go ahead and show some folks what
yeah, I'm sorry. For some reason, oh, okay. Now I can do it. Now I can do it.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
It's messing with me. Anyway, I ended up doing a lot of assemblage stuff, which now I can't show, but also working with a lot of symbols, and this came out of a lot of the typography, working with symbols, and this is from a collection of ideograms that I did, also not in the show, but earlier work. And because my original training is as a mathematician, and so more in the science area, math and logic. So my work tends to be based a lot in the cross of math and science with art or with literature or philosophy. So I'll stop that share. And then later got into more assemblage type work and other 2D. So I'll show a couple things from the show. One thing I ended up also doing more printed work, combining print, stenciling, drawing, etc. This is an ideogram. I think this one isn't in the show, but there are other ones similar to this where I made the rubber stamps, did the drawing and the stencils, and do composition like that. So again, you can see the relation to mathematics and symbols and sign, but also interaction. And also working with assemblage. I'll just show the blocks that I think you mentioned before. Also working again with a variety of materials. So this is a work that is in the show called Blocks of Time, where the concept behind this is time both linear, like the seasons, and cyclical, like the phases of the moon and other celestial and earth phases. And linear also, I don't know if you can see in the back, there's also like language, how language develops in time. And so again, using materials to incorporate and sort of highlight the different concepts. And those actually, what you see in the cutouts of the blocks are different watch parts. So again, based on time.
Oh my gosh.
Underneath. So that is in the show. In a container that took a long time to make, as Jean said. And the last thing I want to share, which I think this one is in the show, and this came out of a residency that was also up at Parsons Center, which is near Interlaken. So it's very much based in the area. One of the things I was glad of is this group of works is really based in the area of which it's being shown, which is around the Lake Ann, Traverse City, et cetera area. So let me share this. There's a bunch of prints. And actually, you'll know the location information, the latitude, longitude there is giving the latitude, longitude of where I was and the Parsons Center. And a lot of the map imagery and the lake, those are from lake maps and lake edges and other geographical boundaries. This is from the area up around Traverse City. This is called locating points.
And you know, having just been up there, those images that are in the show, I see the cloud formations as well, even though I know that these are geological. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and this series is called Bodies of Water. And again, it was an exploration of bodies of water, both the water, the lakes, the rivers, the clouds, humans. I mean, so it was working with that as well as on geographical, environmental, and psychological, bringing that together. Anyway, so that just brings us forward that I work in all of those media, both 2D and books and assemblages. So that, and currently I do work in all of those.
Thanks, Ruth. I'm so glad that you ended with that series because that's actually the one I wanted to ask you about. So as I was hanging the work and reading the titles, and you know, I'm the lucky one because as you're talking about these, I get to turn and I'm like, okay, I see this piece, so maybe I'll get up and go. But can you tell us? I mean, you already explained that you are responding to these locations. Can you tell me a little bit about what you're thinking about? I guess in terms of choosing to use a map, and maybe conceptually what you're thinking about with map. And as you do that, I'm just going to take my little camera and show some of these examples.
So actually mapping, when I did that residency up at Parsons, the basis for the residency was looking at mapping and geography and the psychological effects of geography, which is what the situationists, was a big thing that the situationists did a while ago. They were mostly based in France. And how geography, environment moves us, like just affects our psychology and literally moves us day to day, makes our thoughts flow, how it impacts us in the most minute or general levels. So that was why a lot of what I used was based on different mapping types of materials or signs or symbols or images that they have graphic qualities that are very evocative. And we read them, the way we read them also is very evocative, but really underneath it was looking at how environment really impacts us and how we respond back to it. So that in itself is sort of a cyclical system. And that's why really all of those works use a variety of different geological maps, topological maps, lake depth maps of that area, of the whole northern lower peninsula area. And then again, like I say, my response to it. So yes, it was very much, and actually mapping is incorporated in a lot different ways in a lot of my work because of it combines that, first of all, it's beautiful, it's a language in itself of symbols, but also is very visual and visually evocative and important visually. We respond to it, and it pushes us in different directions. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. So I just want to remind everybody that while you're listening, if you have questions for these artists, please go ahead and feed them into the chat or the Q&A, and we will add them to the conversation. So we definitely want to hear from all of our artists. So Ruth, we might come back to you with some more questions. But thinking another thread that I have enjoyed seeing in the exhibit is exactly how you kind of ended there about the environment. And that materiality, of course, plays in here too. But with that in mind, I want to turn over to you, Sue, if that's okay, to hear a little bit more about your creative practice, how you got started, and what's influencing the work that you're doing. And whether the sharing works on your end, you can give it a go, or I've got some images to share too. And Kristi just fed website into the chat for those who want to see some examples. So thanks, Sue. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, my sharing is not working. I did want to, if you can, Liz, I did want to show a couple things from that slideshow that I gave you.
You got it.
Okay.
Oops, come on. Everybody see that okay? Loading?
It's loading.
Loading, yeah,
There
great.
we go.
Okay, so this is called a Suzani, which is a Central Asian textile, and it is all embroidered with chain stitch, and they're pretty big. They can be sort of like the size of a bed covering. And I've been studying these for a while. I love the structure and the kind of settled, what's the word? Stability of the composition, but just the stylization of really simple images like suns and tulips and carnations. And you could go to the next slide, Liz. So this is a very typical structure, and then there's this, which has these kind of fantastical floral designs that are definitely, taken from nature, but they're evolved by the person creating this piece. So I decided I would do kind of an homage to the Suzani. You can go to the next one. And what I did, this was the first one I made, and so I decided what I would do is photograph circular mandala-like objects, mostly from nature, that I would see when I was on walks or hikes. And so you can see here that there's a collection of things like nuts, lichen, tree rings, and manhole covers, because these were all things. And the title of this one is Looking Down. So these are all things that I had to look down and observe. And they're from my neighborhood, they're from Northern Michigan, they're from Corsica, on trips that I took. So then I resized everything and made everything more or less the same radial size, and made silk screens. And this is a silk screen and collaged and stitched. And then the next one is what eventually, worked from that into a less symmetrically oriented composition, but still taking those objects and placing them. And this is the one that's in the show. This is called Incantation. And the idea that I was working with, again, it's all drawings that I did that I turned into silk screens. But the idea that you could have an object and an image, and you could make it really potent seeming by placing it in a certain way in the composition. And then these sort of vine-like elements that surround it and tie everything together to create this sense of drama and a sort of like there's a spell being cast, basically using these objects. So that was kind of one thread that I did. And then the next, the other thing that I have in the show is a series that's called Mille Fleurs. And they were all inspired by the unicorn tapestries, which are a series of pieces that you can actually see in the cloisters in New York if you go there. And it's a chronicle of the hunt for a unicorn. And there's a lot of elements in these tapestries that are thought to be very symbolic, religiously symbolic. But one thing that happens in all of them is that there's this incredibly dense background of little tiny flowers and plants and leaves. And they're all kind of, they're from all seasons, they're all different types, so it's a gathering together that doesn't correspond to reality, but it's highly decorative at the same time that it exists in a sort of semi-representational format. And that's something that I'm always attracted to. So I thought I would do some collages based on this idea of the Mille Fleurs. So here's one that's in the show, and it is made of vintage linens. And this is a good example of kind of my way of working, that I did a lot of drawings of various plant materials that I gathered and some textures. So there's a texture of lichens, there are some dried out plant seed husks, and I started printing them in many different colors on different textures and types of fabric. And then I collected things like lace, crocheted elements. Sometimes I dyed those, sometimes I printed on them, and then I just started piecing it all together. So next. And this is another one this is in the show too. And sometimes I incorporate commercial fabric. So this one, the little red flowers are from, I think it was a tablecloth that I had. And so it's this kind of collecting and observing and just kind of spending a lot of time with these materials. It's very slow. I don't know if anybody's in the audience has done collage, but I both like and fear the collage process because it doesn't really have a lot of rules. And a lot of times I feel a bit at sea, and all you can do is just keep working through it. And then you get to a point where you have enough in your composition that you can start to make it work together by linking things. And I will say that there's a collage I had been working on it's not in the show. I ended up thinking it was just not good enough, but I remember taking it to Ruth and Jean for input, and we talked about it for a long time and the whole process of, how to make it work, what to add, and it's just kind of ongoing when you do collage. So next one. And then another thing that inspires me that's kind of related to the mixed media drawings that are in the show is just intricacy of natural forms. This is an example of an Ernst Haeckel engraving. Ernst Haeckel was a German scientist and artist, and he did a lot of recording of these tiny organisms called radiolaria. So these are actually living creatures that have an exoskeleton, and when I saw this, I was just so amazed, and you know, just relates to the way I like to draw, to take the sort of inspiration of a natural object, but then kind of fantasize on top of it and add to it. So, yeah, so yeah, you can go to the next one. So that influences my drawing. And this is a detail of one of the mixed media pieces that's in the show that kind of just continues the whole idea of the collage. So these, there's a couple drawings in the show that are large scale. They're on paper, but they have textile elements that are fused onto the paper surface. And that includes, again, silk screening, some painting, and some laser cutting. So in this detail here on the lower right hand side, that's my version of a morel mushroom, which I converted to a file and did as a laser cut and then fused on there. And to combine that with bits of lace, bits of crocheting, and then, you know, one thing that's really, you can't really do when you're silk screening is, or when you're working on fabric generally, you really can't draw on it. You have to make a drawing, put it on a silk screen and print it for it to look like a drawing. Because if you draw on fabric, you just can't move your hand in a natural way. So it was really fun to do these drawings and just be able to combine kind of just the freedom of large scale drawing with the collage elements. I think that's it, right? So those are the main things that that relate to the show that I wanted to kind of communicate.
So we do have one question. Sue, when you created the originals, do you first do a drawing draft?
In general, for everything? Yeah, I do. And usually it's the scale of the final piece. Like, I don't know if you can see behind me, but I have a sketch up there on my wall. I'm going to do a stitch resist, which is the technique of the globe thistle that's in the gallery. So I'm going to do, that's a giant beet cut in a cross section. So I might do small drawings that are somewhat detailed, but then I'll do a really big schematic one, and then I'll start working from that. But I tend to do kind of the more involved sketching once I've got my materials ready and my screen and things.
And then I actually have another question. So on one of your last collage pieces that you shared, let's say the crochet pieces, are those pieces that you're crocheting, or are you, when you're going and collecting, are those pieces okay.
Yeah, they're found. I have a lot of things that I inherited from my grandmother and my great aunt, and then I'm always kind of on the lookout. And people give me things now because I have a lot of friends who know that I want this stuff, and if they hear of somebody that's, you know, a lot of people now, you know, you're moving or you're getting older and you don't want all these linen doilies. And we don't really use them in our daily lives anymore. And it's very sad to come upon them. So it's nice, you know, people feel like, good, I don't have to throw it away. You know, I can give it to Sue.
Right.
I have quite a big pile of them.
Oh, I love that. I think many of us do fall into that trap as people who like to work with material, right? Jean, I'm excited to get to you, but real quick, because I think this is something that I see throughout the three of you, and you kind of hinted at it a little bit, Sue. I'm interested if any of you want to comment on the relationship between paper and fibers, right, and textiles. I personally, in my own creative practice, really like to merge the two and stitch with paper, and I see that, you know, in your work. Does anybody want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, if you think of the origins of paper, and if you know anything about handmade paper, especially using natural materials, you're using plant fibers. So whenever I'm working with paper, I really think of it as a fibrous material. And then it's true as a book artist that I do use book cloth. So, and there is a lot of stitching. So there's definitely kind of an interweaving between those materials.
That's perfect. So let's use that as a segue for you to tell us a little bit about your work, Jean. I'm going to, in the background while you get started, see if I have anything to share to complement.
Okay. So just maybe a little bit about my background. I have both a design and fine art background. And also during this time, I've just been thinking a lot about how my thinking and working processes have evolved. So it's true when I was quite young. When I was 8 years old, I took my first art lessons, and they were in oil painting. A friend of the family actually gave lessons in his basement. And I very clearly remember sitting looking at still lifes, having to understand these materials, and also having a pretty immediate, clear connection with the manual aspects of things. So paintbrushes, viscosity of paint. Then I also took a lot of sewing lessons when I was young. I happened to be 6'2", and I was 5'10" in the 6th grade, and my mother very wisely signed me up for sewing lessons. And the construction of things and material selection was a very enjoyable part of that process. In undergraduate school, I majored in design, but I took an awful lot of electives just for in things that I really responded to. So I took a lot of geology classes, which I think has informed my connection to the natural world. I took a lot of literature classes. I also write poetry. I took some photo classes and did a lot of photography for a while. It's just to say that it took me quite a while to kind of get to a point where I found out about book arts, and that was a really great umbrella for me to be concentrating on a multitude of media. So Ruth has already mentioned how text and image are important to her. You know, that melding in handmade books is a pretty strong anchor in my work. It's true that it's still not the only thing that I do. Sue mentioned that she enjoys working in series. I find that one series kind of leads to the next. And it's true that I don't really like doing the same thing over and over. So I will get to a point. I'm remembering I did a series of gouache paintings, and those lasted for a couple of years. And all of a sudden it was sort of like, that kind of feels finished. And then there was a new kind of concept or materials investigation that I was interested in. So I think it's true that my work in the show, you know, there's those, for instance, there's the insects on the paper. That's a very new ongoing series of work that came from nature walks, collecting things. You know, first it started with rocks. I've always collected insects. It's really kind of a probing into going beyond just drying insects and pinning them, but really, I mean, I'm using them as almost a drawing material. Those pieces, like this particular one, is a tulip with insects underneath. And I'm utilizing a nipping press, which is something I use in bookbinding. So the material, there's a cicada with a lily leaf. It's just those two, it's just and in this piece, this dragonfly, a lot of people think that there's some painting involved, but it's just the dragonfly on paper that's then put in the nipping press. And, you know, I'm interested in life cycles. This work, you know, obviously we get to see insects in a very different context. You know, often we think of insects as kind of nuisance, but I think they're also, you know, beautiful to consider in different forms. You're kind of looking at a couple of board books, which is a fun structure in terms of its stability. The interesting thing about making books is that you've always got a left and a right. You have a recto and a verso. And then you can kind of clearly see here how, as you literally page through a book, you then have the memory of the pages before. So there's a temporal aspect in books that I really appreciate. I guess at this point, I'm wondering if anybody in the audience has any questions.
I'm going to, let's see if I can do this. I want to show, oh yes, this one. Can you tell me a little bit about this piece, The Smells of Spring, The Smells of Father?
Oh, sure. That's fairly recent in terms of the letterpress work that I do. So it's a poem of mine that I wrote about my father. And I've had that poem around for a long time. And actually, my father passed quite a while ago. My mother died just a few years ago, and it was really after my mom died that I kind of revisited that poem. So, you know, I think about it, I think what kind of structure might be appropriate. It's true that now we have all different kinds of like shoe wear. But when my dad was alive, I mean, he had his work shoes, and when the work shoes got old, that's what he wore in the garden. So that's what the shoe really references for me. And it does make me think when I'm doing that letterpress edition work. So, you know, I commit to, it's just one poem. That book is just one poem. So it's fairly slight text. The shoe is the prominent illustration. In that case, each of the bindings is a little bit different in terms of the colors of the book cloth. But I get to spend time with the concept of that book and the memory of my dad as I'm doing the edition binding. And I forget how many there are, but maybe there's like 40 or 50 of that particular book.
So we do have a question popping into the chat, and this is to everybody. The comment is that the attendee loves the cerebral approach to the art making. And the question is, do you feel that this aids your creativity, or do you find that it can hinder it while you overthink? Oh, Ruth has something to say. All right.
Well, I'll respond a little bit. I know everybody has something. We all work very differently in these ways. But for me, I have to start with either a concept or a work I'm responding to, a literary work or philosophical work or science work. I have to start in that framework, which is very different than Sue's process, where she was collecting and starting from the actual materials, shapes, forms, colors, you know, drawings, and then working with that. I have to start more in that conceptual way. I usually start reading, researching, responding, thinking about responding, but it's always to some analytic or verbal or literary work. So, and Jean is also different, right?
Yeah, I think maybe I'm somewhere in the middle. You know, it's true as an individual studio artist, you spend a lot of time by yourself and you are in your head a lot. So there's definitely the cerebral aspect, but I think I am happiest when I've thought something out, maybe designed a mock-up, and then I just get to make it. And there's a lot of muscle memory involved. Mm-hmm. And, you know, as much time as you spend with color selections and materials, it becomes more intuitive. So I think for me, it moves from the cerebral into the more material process aspect.
I think for me, maybe it's the other way around, that I start with the collection, and I like a process that involves, I like to work in a way that I'm making decisions as I'm working. Not that I have figured everything out ahead of time, and then carry it out. So a lot of times what I do is very slow, and I take sort of a long time, and I allow a lot of time. Think about what I'm doing when I'm on a walk. I take a lot of walks because I have a dog. And so I go in the woods. I spend a lot of time in the woods walking, and it's really great because it's this time that you can't be doing anything else, but your mind can just kind of float and think about, so I might be thinking about my work, and I will come to some kind of decision or, realization about what I'm doing. And then when I'm in the process, things will happen, and I have to alter the course of the work because of the nature of these messy materials that I work with. So then I might be revising the concept. So it kind of goes back and forth. And then in the end, I don't know about Jean and Ruth, but often in the end, I can make up the history. Like I can say, well, this was what was going on all along because these things happened, and it changed. So.
Yeah, I can relate. We have one more question for Jean, and the question is, do you use any special process in the preservation and presentation of the insects?
Oh, the insects. I've been doing them for a while, and I've kind of wondered what's the kind of stability of these things. A little. It's the insects, and then there is a very light adhesive that I sometimes use called methyl cellulose, and it is plant-based. And so after the insects have been in the nipping press sometimes they're there for months, because I just want to be sure that I've, really all of the insect has really embedded itself into the paper. I put a really light coating of the methyl cellulose. And I've been pretty good. I'm pretty good about framing things on a regular basis. So I also feel that as soon as I can get something in a frame, it's going to be stabilized as well.
Interesting. Okay, so we're about out of time. I don't know how this question will go, but I like it, Sherry. So we're going with
I know.
this is going to be our final question, and then some lucky attendee gets a coffee gift card. So the question is, well, again, you each seem to have a very definitive voice in your artwork. Can you each sum up in one word what you specifically want to say to the world through your art? Go.
Persevere.
Okay, persevere. I like it.
Observe.
I'm having a time. I'm gonna have a tough
I wouldn't be
time
able to do it.
because I would say sort of, I don't have one word. It's more expanded observation, or expanded, maybe interrelationships.
I was going to say
interrelationships.
Yeah.
Connections,
Beautiful.
interrelationships.
Oh, that's great. I really, you guys, thank you so much for joining us today and giving us some insight into what goes on in the studio and inside your head. I really encourage everybody who can physically join us here in Petoskey to see the work in person. There is so much detail and intimacy in the materials, and that we're so glad to be able to share all of this with you virtually, but it's a different experience in person. So please join us. It's up through the end of the year. So we hope that you can join us. So thanks again, Sue. Thanks, Ruth. Thanks, Jean. Thanks to everybody who was in attendance. And Kristi, let's do the
I will. Margaret Kirkby. Margaret Kirkby.
Oh, I can't hit Margaret Kirkby.
Yeah, and I am gonna say one more quick thing. The ladies, you had all so generously offered to host a workshop at Crooked Tree, and perhaps that's something that we can revisit either location, but but even more now that I've had this lovely opportunity, and so have our attendees and our future attendees who are going to watch the recorded version. But perhaps we can look at that again, because to have the three of you interacting, and I just think it would be magic. So
That'd be great.
to be continued.
To be continued.
All right, thanks everybody. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.